Hello, 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 and welcome to the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissel, and joining me, as always, Garrett Sahlman. How's it going, man?
Ben, do you know how much I love you and the listeners? For us to record a podcast at 8:45 in the morning. Um, for anyone who doesn't know, I hate the mornings. I'm like a don't look at me, don't talk to me, don't breathe my air. So it's a big deal for me to kind of do this, and I think it shows that I really like you. I really like all doing this. I really like the listeners. So you're welcome. The sacrifices I make for you are pretty significant, and this is one of them.
I think it's only taken us, audience, like 5 years for him to tell us that he likes us. So it's been a
Yes.
slow build, but we've finally gotten there. So that's good to hear. I appreciate the flexibility. This worked out well for me. Yeah, I've been up for like 2 or 3 hours with the boys, so I am now
Yeah.
a full morning person because I start my mornings plenty early to be ready to roll at a time like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're just kind of you're a father, right? So you are by
Yeah.
nature the most unselfish person that you have to be. I am as selfish as I want to be and get to be. So, but regardless, no worries. We shall make it work. Um, what wasn't selfish was the one person who did leave a rating and review. So thank you. That was nice. One on Apple. Just found the podcast and love it. Just a great listen. Thank you for doing that. See how very simple that review was? Very simple. Really, really appreciate it. If we get every other number up, though, that would be great. But Ben, we had a big weekend for DMR, as always, and it did not disappoint, as always. So we're going to recap that today. We're going to go over a few individual performances, and then we'll dive into conference weekend next weekend. But let's chat about DMR weekend right now. And where did you want to start?
Yeah, and let's start with one of the two DMR records that we saw, NCAA records, that it's not the fastest necessarily time ever, but they are the true NCAA DMR records. And we'll start on the women's side where we saw Oregon run a NCAA record 10:42, beating the likes of North Carolina, who ran 10:44, Georgetown and Harvard, who ran 10:47, NC State, who ran 10:48, and Providence, who ran 10:51. You look at the performance lists after after this weekend, and I think it's maybe a little bit more true on the men's side. But man, it is just unbelievably quick. And there's some relays where you're like, oh man, yeah, I ran 10:52. And yeah, you're not going to be suiting up for the national meet right now, which is a kind of an absurd thing to say.
It is an absurd thing to say. I was looking at this earlier and I remember being like, man, remember when like 10:53, 10:54 was like a big deal to run?
Yeah.
And nowadays it's like, nah, you're not really going to be in the mix. And that's pretty wild to me. So, Oregon, I want to talk about Oregon. They started off with the official quote unquote NCAA record of
Yes.
10:42. Um, is it wild to say that I'm almost borderline underwhelmed by their 10:42?
Yeah, I think it depends on who you expected them to race, right? If you
Yeah, that's true.
expected them to run a full, like their absolute A lineup that had Wilma Nielsen, Maddie Elmore. We haven't really seen Claudia Kazimierska, so I don't know if you could have really expected her. But certainly those first two, you could have expected. If they run that, then you're like, yeah, I would have been surprised to see them not run under 10:40 in that scenario. Now, with the lineup that they did, a still very good lineup. Julia Nielsen, Mia Barnett on the 800 leg, and then Ayilda's bringing home the anchor. Still a very good lineup, but it's just not the full firepower that the Ducks had at their disposal.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been known as more of a conservative predictor
Yeah.
maker, and I predicted them to run 10:33. They were 9 seconds short of that, which is um, very, very far off. But regardless, yeah, I think you're right. It's a lot of it's the lineup. So we haven't seen Kazmierska yet. Haven't seen Elmore yet. I doubt that we're going to see them this season.
Right.
But I did think it was going to be like Barnett on the opening 1200 meter leg, and then Julia Nielsen or Wilma Nielsen somewhere in there. Maybe Wilma on the 800. So I don't know. I also just like didn't even know if this was like the right lineup order in some instances. So, but
Right.
regardless, nice run by Oregon. North Carolina at 10:44. Really, really solid. Michaela Page is like just an awesome opening 1200-meter leg.
Mm-hmm.
She reminds me a lot of Nick Plant on the men's side for Virginia Tech, where she can step up just that extra 400 meters and she's still really, really, really good. I think North Carolina is a complete DMR. I think they're a balanced DMR. And I really like them a lot. And I don't really think we have any reason to think that like this lineup's probably going to be well, you know what? I take that back. I was going to say that they're going to be fresh, but I guess Page is not going to be, right.
No, but I mean, you look at this lineup though, and you compare it to the other teams that were running in this race, and this is probably the closest one to a complete lineup that you're going to see at the national meet, right? And I think that is why their performance sticks out probably the most because, yeah, Paige won't be fresh, but you could look at everybody else and say, hey, like pretty much everyone else will be fresh and will be running at the national meet. And that makes them a very compelling contender in the DMR, where you're going to be seeing a lot of teams either not running their top athletes or just they're going to be doubling back from an 800 or mile prelim. And so, I mean, to run 10:44 without really losing a whole lot, I think puts them in a great position. Now, you worry about what does their anchor leg end up looking like? Is it Bryn Brown? Is it Taryn Parks? And can they go head to head against some of the best in the NCAA when it comes down to it? And I think that's their biggest question mark. But I mean, after running 10:44, you have to feel super confident in their ability to mix it up with the top group at nationals.
So if Paige is running the 800-meter leg and she doesn't double back, which is technically possible, but let's just say she doesn't, um, Bryn Brown is probably going to be that other name that replaces her. Who runs the 12 flag? Is that going to be Parks or is it going to be Brown? And then does the other one run the anchor?
I think I would prefer Parks after this 4:30 split. You're definitely,
You prefer her on the opener or anchor?
I think, on the anchor, just because it is. I think Parks can certainly run a better 1200 leg, but I don't know if it's going to save quite as much time as her running the anchor leg. And in these national championships, we've seen it sometimes where teams will just run away with it. But generally, there's kind of a cluster within the top couple of teams going into that last leg, and it's kind of just like, hey, who can have the best kick, who can run away from everybody, and I think she's their best bet to at least hang. Right? I don't know, she's not going to drop anybody, but she might be able to stick with them long enough to secure a top finish. I don't have that same confidence in Bryn Brown.
I I agree that she's. I don't think Brown is going to be the better option on the anchor, but I do think Brown is, from a net time perspective, the better option on the anchor. I think Parks, you lead off with her, you're not really getting much of a drop off between
No.
her and Paige on the opening leg, and then I think comparatively from Parks down to Brown, you're not getting a dramatic drop off from the anchor position there. I think it's almost more important for Brown in this case to get a little bit of a lead, or to get some kind of jump on the rest of the field, maybe even if it's not all of it, and have Parks set them up well on the 1200-meter leg, where I think that's maybe even her best distance, basically. So I actually like Parks on the opening leg, and then having Brown come down to the anchor, just because I think if you put Brown on the 1200-meter leg, you're asking a true long distance 5K, 10K talent to kind of come down to a pretty speedy event. And I just don't know how conducive to success that is. So yeah, I guess we'll see. I do think we're going to see that lineup order that we're talking about. I don't know if it's going to be my guess or your guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you in more of a time trial setting. I just wonder if in the national meet, hey, like even if they're behind a little bit in the 1200, they have good 400, 800-meter legs that they can kind of close the gap enough. And then if it's close, then I would rather have Parks. But yeah, I think it's a compelling argument one way or the other. Behind North Carolina, we had Georgetown and Harvard. Again, hard to read too much into this. There's going to be. Do you think we'll see a lot of these women doubling back? Like, do we think we'll see Riggins, Goriarin, Bossung from these respective squads?
um, I think if you're Harvard for Goriarian and Bossong, I think it's like a hey, if you didn't
Didn't
advance to the
qualify. Yeah.
finals, yeah, if you didn't advance to the finals, then you're gonna run this. But if you did, then we're gonna find a replacement and just
Right.
kind of make it is what it is. I think them running this well was kind of like a big jump with Penelope Salmon running as well as she did on that anchor leg. So for Harvard, I think it's gonna be fine. For Georgetown, I think they replace Riggins. I think Riggins, if she doesn't advance, which I think she will to the finals,
Yeah.
if she doesn't advance, then yeah, she's coming back. But um, I think Georgetown's going to have to ultimately replace someone um, with that mile leg. So
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately why it's like, all right, great performances. They made it to the they got their teams to the national meet. Hard to see either of these teams having like a clear cut path to being super competitive at the national meet. But really good performance again. Riggins was awesome once again. She's had a very under the radar great season in a season where, and we'll talk more about this. We've seen so many women run 426, like 427. Like she's just kind of flown on the radar and been very, very solid. And then NC State and Providence, 1048, 1051. I thought fine performance from NC State. Again, their lineup's going to look very different. Providence, though, you have Flockhart, you have May. And this was kind of like the trump card for them, right? You put two of the best milers in the country, put them on one DMR. And even if in between them isn't great, they should still be very competitive. And they just weren't, right? I mean, they were so far back. And they made it to the national meet, but I wonder if this changes their perspective on, hey, are they going to try to double these women, or just try to have like I think we had thought maybe DMR 3K in certain situations. I wonder if they focus more on individual events now.
well, I don't think Flockhart's even qualified for the mile
Yeah,
right
that's
now,
that's true.
which is
Yeah,
a pretty like crazy thing actually when you think about it. Of like, wait, she's not qualified for the mile, so
yeah, that's wild.
um, like Flockhart has not looked herself. Like she did not look
No,
like herself in this past weekend. It just felt like she struggled to really put herself in that top mix. She faded from the top of the field. And May, I'm not really gonna ding her for like what I call like a poor race when it was just I don't really know what it was that she could have done, you know.
right.
Um, but this was weird, and I gotta be honest. I'm not confident that Providence is safe. You still got conference weekend coming up. It feels like
Yeah.
there's just at least one, maybe two, at least one relay that comes through last minute, maybe at a last chance meet, and they go, "Yep, we got it. We're gonna go after it," and someone gets them. 10:51:88 is fast, but it's not unrealistic for another team like Florida, for another team like New Mexico, Penn State, Arkansas to go after it and try to get that. So I would be very, very careful if I'm one of those, if I'm Providence and wonder, hey, like, do you want to try to maybe pursue another relay at Big East this weekend?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think SECs, obviously you mentioned Florida and Arkansas. If one of those two teams want to go after it, they certainly have the athletes where you think they could improve their times by a couple seconds and knock off that 10:51 from Providence. So yeah, I think really the Providence performance was like the most impactful one of the weekend in terms of
Yep.
shaping how we see the national DMR, because we just came in thinking that they were going to be one of the top contenders, and now there's question on whether or not they're going to make the national meet, and taking them out of that field where you're not having a ton of women fresh, you're not really having a ton of top tier names running the event necessarily. I think opens the door to a couple of teams to say, hey, we're going to go for the DMR. We weren't really planning on it, but it's just wide open for us to take.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, hey, Kimberly May, like, will she even run the DMR now at this point? Like,
Right.
she's on the fringe of the mile. I still don't know how much that really matters, but um, yeah, what a weird, what just a, of all the things that we could have predicted of, like,
Yeah.
hey, will Flockhart or May, will either of them be in the top 10 of the mile national leaderboard in the mile? And I've been like, yeah, of course they will. No problem. And now none of them are. May is just on the line and potentially in danger of not making it if something absurd really happens. And then that DMR, there's a possibility they don't make it. So weird development across the board for that women's DMR. But let's move to the men's side, where at that same Boston U meet, I'm going to keep us in Boston. We had a very entertaining, very exciting, close, narrow battle, all-time marks with Wake Forest men. Rocky Hansen narrowly outleans Ethan Strand of UNC at the line, splits 350 for the win. Wake Forest and North Carolina both run 9:17 in the DMR, separated by .02 seconds. Wake Forest at NCAA number 4 all time, UNC number 5. Princeton right behind them, at 9:17, and I think 9:17.3, and then Georgetown in fourth, Virginia Tech in fifth in 9:19. What is your major takeaway from these results?
So yeah, for me, it was really Wake Forest and Princeton were the big takeaways here. And really for Wake Forest, it was Rocky Hansen. For him to run as fast as he did, I mean, know that he could be a very good miler or 1500-meter runner, but we haven't really seen him run anything super quick in those events yet. And for him to split 350, and not only that, but out lean Ethan Strand
Yep.
in his like best event probably. Now he didn't run faster than Strand, but he was able to take him down in that last straightaway, which really very few people have ever been able to do,
Yeah.
was insanely impressive. Now for Princeton, we knew Witt is on a roll right now, so for him to run like he did, not super surprising. I think the fact that they were able to set him up to be able to be very competitive going into that anchor leg, I think that's probably the more exciting part for Princeton, because you take Witt out of this and everybody else is probably going to be able to run at the national meet. Now, you're losing a big piece in Witt, but maybe he does double back and he at least gives you something. They're very much now in the All-American picture, even if he does double back in my mind. And if they bring in someone fresh who can run like a I don't know if they have anybody else who can run like a 355, 357 leg, they're still going to be competitive for an All-American spot. Now, it'll be a lower class spot, but I think this shows that they have the makings of a pretty darn good DMR, despite even without their best runner.
So for Wake Forest running this 9:17, Hansen's probably going to run the 5K at the national meet, right? So right?
Yeah,
Yes. Okay, cool. I just want to double check.
I think so.
Hansen, take him out, right? You have you have Swainpole. Who is that other leg? Is it T-Wall? Because does T-Wall do the DMR 3K? Would it make sense for him to do that? Is that like a reasonable thing to do? Is it like just another miler like JoJo Jordan who they can find? Like what
Yeah.
is the move here with Wake Forest?
I think it's probably T-Wall, right? I think, the 739 3K performance clearly shows that he's fit. He's not qualified in anything else. I mean, he has only run 402 this year in the mile, but you would imagine, based off that 739, based off of his past 1500-meter experiences where he's run 338, he could run a 355 at least and keep them very competitive. And again, like we were talking about on the women's side, in a field that could be a touch diluted compared to years past because of doubling back and people not running their top lineups. I think it doesn't put Wake Forest necessarily in the conversation to win, but it puts them in that next tier below to be a very high All-American finish.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Um, I do think it's probably T-Wall. Unless they really think that he can be like unless they think he's an All-American favorite, which maybe they do. But I agree. I think you probably put T-Walt in there because I think if you put T-Walt in there, that's probably your best chance at an All-American finish, or at least a top half All-American finish as him as
Yeah.
the replacement. Um, will Paul Specht run the anchor leg and then T-Walt on the leadoff, or is it Paul Specht on the leadoff, T-Walt on the anchor?
Yeah, I think you probably keep this current lineup and then you just swap out Hanson and T Walt.
Yeah,
I
I
think.
think so too. I think so too. In a post race interview, I'm switching off suddenly
Yeah.
real quick. But in a post race interview with Harrison Witt from 2 weeks ago,
Hmm.
we asked him, "Hey man, like what's next? What are you gonna do?" And he talked about the DMR and how quote unquote the team always comes first. The relay always comes first, and he seemed to be a very team centric guy. Is there a world where Harrison Witt scratches out of the open mile and Princeton goes all in for the DMR?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a world, and we'll talk more about some of these other performances that we saw in the DMR this weekend and in the past couple of weeks. But you look at this list, right? And if Princeton's running a full lineup, and you look at how many teams do you think they realistically or who could realistically beat them, right? I think depending on the lineup that Washington runs, possibly. I think Oklahoma State is certainly one. But outside of that, it's like I don't. There's not really any other teams that you feel like could beat them. Now it depends on, I guess. I don't think Gary Martin's going to run the DMR. Virginia becomes obviously one of the favorites if he does. But really, it's like Washington, Oklahoma State, and Princeton if Witt runs. And I don't. I think you could make an argument that Witt would be the best miler in that group. Out, depending on who Washington and Oklahoma State close with. Now, Shoppy, I think we'll talk more about that. Ran a very very good leg in his in Oklahoma State's performance, but I mean, Washington's probably not going to be using their top guys. They're still going to be very, very fast. But Witt has shown that he is one of the best milers in the country, and having him on the anchor leg would provide them a huge advantage.
I agree. If I'm Princeton, I'm still like, hey, Witt, I know you had a great season. You're scratching the mile. Go for the DMR. You look at Washington. Highly doubt that they're going to have three of their main legs. I
Right.
don't see that happening. I don't think McMahon, Staggs, Reinheimer, or Green will run it. I don't think it makes sense for them. I think Virginia at this point, they're like, Gary Martin's just been way too good this year for him to
Yeah.
kind of have to run on that DMR, basically triple doing the mile DMR 3K. And then Oklahoma State, I think we're forgetting Brian Masau on the leadoff leg. He's qualified in the 5K.
Mhm.
I think that's the only event that he's really qualified in. He's not qualified in the 3K, so I don't think he runs. And now all of a sudden you start looking at this and you open the door to Princeton, and Princeton now looks like a team that, you know, I think if everyone continues to run well and Witt's still on the top of his game and certain guys don't run for other relays, Princeton has a realistic shot at the national title, which is not something I expected to say at the
Yeah.
beginning of the season. So, yeah, I thought Connor
Well,
McCormick did extremely well for them this past weekend. I thought it was just a really great lineup effort in total. But I would not sleep on Princeton, even in that scenario that I just outlined for you of who runs what. Who do you still think becomes the favorite in the DMR?
I think
Is it Princeton?
uh, I think I would still lean Oklahoma State just
Yep,
because they've
so would
done
I.
it. But I think Princeton's compelling. And the wild card that we didn't really talk about is what if Strand does the DMR 3K double? Because I think there's a world where I mean, he wants to come into the DMR or the 3K, excuse me, fairly fresh instead of running it after the miles. And I mean, that'd be kind of crazy for someone who's run 348 this year, but he's also run 730 this year in the DMRs or in the 3K. And so, which one do you want to set him up for better success, right? And if you want to set him up for more success in the 3K, DMR makes a lot of sense, and you could end up getting two golds out of that.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the same argument about Martin though, and
Right.
I'm okay. How about this? Do you think it's more likely than not that we see one of Martin or Strand scratch the mile in favor of the DMR? Like what's more likely? Both of those guys scratch, or one guy comes back to run the DMR?
Both of them scratch or both of them don't scratch?
I'm sorry. If both of them scratch from the DMR,
Oh, right.
or
Yeah.
one of them comes back to run the DMR or just runs the DMR period, what's
Yeah,
more
I think
likely?
it's more likely that they scratch the DMR and we don't see either of them. But it's almost kind of like a game theory thing, right? Where it's like if one of them scratches, then the other was probably more likely to not scratch, right? But
Well, I mean,
they
how could they
obviously aren't going to
possibly
know that.
know?
They
Yeah,
won't know
right.
it, and that's like the game of chicken that you're kind of playing, right? And I because I think for both of those teams, right? If you could say, hey, we could have a really good shot at winning the DMR, and then our athletes still going to have a very good shot at winning another individual event. I think that's because the problem is with the mile, like if you run the mile 3K, you're only giving yourself one chance really to win a title. It's very very difficult to win the mile, come back, win the 3K, especially with the quality of field that's in the 3K. So I agree that it's unlikely, but I do think that there's a compelling argument for at least one of them to run the DMR.
Yeah, yeah, I like the game theory note there. My economics degree is really like I'm just like, yeah, I know what that is. I know what that is. And in a little bit of a weird way, it's also kind of like prisoner's dilemma ish.
Right.
When you
Yeah.
it's where it's just like, well, like if you choose this but they choose that, then your chances of winning or not winning go up and down. Um, so we talked about the top three there: North Carolina, Wake Forest, Princeton. Um, Georgetown and Virginia Tech, both running 919. Virginia Tech, Nick Plant, the 249
Awesome.
split. I mean, he was unreal dominant on that opening leg. I mean, he was scary, scary good. I don't think he's going to run the DMR. I think he's going to run the
Yeah.
800 prelims, and he'll probably advance. Georgetown, I struggle to think that this lineup is going to be what they see at the national meet. So, for as exciting as this is, I don't know if this is really going to matter unless you think they're going to double.
No, I don't. But it was an interesting lineup. Having Matsatsa be the anchor, I was thinking that they might go Tefra anchor,
Yep.
and it was an interesting way of doing it. Obviously, it worked out fairly well. But yeah, I could see maybe one of these guys doubling back, but I don't
But what would be
think
the point?
it's right. Exactly. That's the thing. Like, I don't think Matsatsa is going to. And then at that point, it's like, what's the point of having Tefra in there with a lineup that's not going to be super competitive?
Yeah, and it's not that they would. I don't think they wouldn't be competitive. It's just more like what's the incentive for Tefra to come
Right.
back? Like you're not winning, if that's the thing.
No, exactly.
But I had heard prior to the race that Matsatso would probably run the lead off, and then he didn't. And I'm with you. I'm like, wait, wouldn't it make way more sense to have him run the 12 and Tefra
Yeah.
the anchor? But tomato, tomato. I guess I don't know. But great runs from Georgetown and Virginia Tech. Let's throw out just a very wild scenario. Let's assume that Virginia Tech's Nick Plant scratches the 800,
Yeah.
and then every other scenario that we've already spoken about, unfolds. Can Virginia Tech win the DMR national title?
I would still say no. I would still, I mean, they could, right? But I would still pick Oklahoma State.
Okay, let me put it this way. Would you put them in the same group as Oklahoma State, as Princeton? We're ignoring Washington,
Right.
Virginia,
Right.
UNC as teams that could, attack strong relays and whatnot. Do you put Virginia Tech in that group of that Oklahoma State and Princeton group?
Yeah. I think so. I think those would be the three favorites, right? If Witt's running for Princeton, if Plant's running for Virginia Tech, and Oklahoma State's running three of their four, I think that's the group, right?
Yeah.
I struggle to see. I mean, maybe like BYU is going to probably be pretty fresh. They don't have the top end capabilities that maybe some other teams do, but yeah, it's really hard. You look down the rest of this list to find a compelling lineup that is going to be fresh and not like destroyed by individuals running their individual events.
Well, so let's actually move this now to Alex Wilson invite, where Wisconsin ran 9:20, Wisconsin men 9:20 to narrowly defeat Texas A&M and BYU, who also ran 9:20 as well. So Spencer right now is not qualified for the
Yeah,
mile
no.
prelims, which is an insane thing to say. Maybe he could be after this upcoming weekend, but right now, if Wisconsin runs an all-out DMR lineup,
Yep.
they'll all be fresh. Are they in the national title picture if all the other scratch scenarios happen?
Yeah. I guess so. I just am so used to being like, well, nope, Spencer's not going to be on that lineup. But like you said, at the moment, he's that's the only place he could be.
Yeah.
So I would struggle to think that he's not going to put in a good effort to make it in the mile. But if he doesn't, then yeah, I think you look at him as the best anchor leg and that we would expect to run in the DMR, and you just hope that they give him a chance, right, to be able to take home that win. And that, I think that's the question, right? Is those first three legs going to be good enough to at least put him not too far behind the eight ball?
Who do you trust more right now, a fully fresh Princeton lineup or a fully fresh Wisconsin lineup?
Princeton, just because
Hmm.
they're running better right now, and what McCormick did in
Yeah.
that leadoff leg inspires a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I agree. I think Princeton's probably the better, more complete lineup. And plus, I just have a feeling that Spencer, like for him to not run a mile at the national meet would be
Right,
crazy.
it'd be weird.
I think he's going to probably go to like a last chance meet somewhere or be paced in the mile somewhere to kind of get like a super quick time out of the way. Um, so yeah, I still have a feeling that like Spencer's not totally out of it yet. I think he'll try to go after a 352 mile or something like that soon. But Texas A&M 920, BYU 920, great runs from them, but also kind of like expected. BYU, I don't think Tyler Matthews is going to be running on this lineup at the national meet, especially when you have Sebastian Fernandez as a potential
Right.
replacement for them on that 800-meter leg. Texas A&M, great lineup, really, really good.
Mm.
I mean, is Cooper Cothra going to qualify for the national meet in the mile?
Oh, where is he right now?
He's 27, so he's probably not making it.
No, he's not.
That lineup's probably going to be fresh. Are they in the national title conversation?
No, I'm not there yet. But I do think like in this we have this conversation every year when we're doing predictions. Like BYU, Texas A&M, like they're just going to be squeaking into national meet, but they're going to be like favorites to finish top 5, top 6 because they're just going to be able to run 920, whereas a lot of these other lineups just aren't going to be able to because they're not how they were constructed when they set their qualifying time.
So if they run a fully fresh DMR lineup, are they locks to be All-Americans?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I agree.
basically any team that qualifies for the national meet, if you run a fully fresh lineup that is the same lineup as what you used to qualify, you are a lock to be an All-American.
So, okay, and so that's now going to transition me to the Arkansas qualifier, where again, same thing on the men's race. Women, for the record, the women's DMR races for Alex Wilson invite, not really worth kind of going over.
Right.
And then the women's races at Arkansas qualifier, there was no women's DMR. So if we seem very men centric, that's just why. Arkansas qualifier, Virginia men run NCAA record, the official NCAA record of 914.19. Oklahoma State 2 seconds behind them in 916, followed by Oregon in 921, Arkansas 921, and Iowa State 921. However, Oregon, of that back three, Oregon's the only one that is set to qualify right now. They're in NCAA number 12 spot. We've kind of already touched on Virginia and Oklahoma State and kind of like what we think about them there. I don't think we're totally shocked. I think Virginia's performance. Outstanding, better than what I expected. I kind of
Yeah.
wasn't very high on a lot of their names. I thought Connor Murphy really stepped up well, but Oregon had fielded a lineup of James Harding, Matthew Erickson, and Elliott Cook. That lineup could be completely fresh.
Yep.
Erickson's on the fringe of qualifying. Is that lineup a national title winning lineup at NCAA number 12 on the national leaderboard?
No, I'm not there. Although it
No.
depends on what Cook
So
version of
you're
Cook
gonna
we get.
say what's that? Wait, say again.
I think it depends on what version of Cook we get because he hasn't quite been at his best, and we've seen him, whether it was last spring or in other seasons, be a little bit better. And so that's the only thing where it's like, hey, if he's at the top of his game, he can go head to head with almost anybody in the country. So I think that's like your confidence in what kind of Cook you're getting is going to dictate how you feel about this Oregon DMR.
Okay. So you think that this fully fresh Oregon lineup is not as good as the fully fresh Wisconsin lineup?
Yes. Although yes, because I think one, I just think Spencer has higher upside than Cook, and again, like Cook, we haven't seen the best out of Spencer this season. But if he's firing on all cylinders, then I would pick him in Wisconsin over Oregon. And again, I would say Wisconsin, if they run that full lineup, they can win. I don't know if I would still put them in that top trio of teams that we've talked about being like the true contenders.
Arkansas 13, Iowa State 14.
Yeah, brutal.
Do they go after another fast DMR? Do either of them?
Oh, man. I don't know if we will. I think a lot of these guys, I mean, I guess it depends, right? Arkansas always wants to be very competitive at the SEC meet, right? And so they're going to be maximizing points scored at the SEC meet. That's going to be their priority. Iowa State, I could see them making an effort for it, but it just requires the right race and using up all your best guys, right? And do you want to try to risk that? That's a tough conversation.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I wasn't really sure, but when you put it that way, I think you're right. So, okay, let's move off of the DMR. That was extensive, so thank you for everyone for dealing with us there. Let's talk about a few miles, a few 800 meter, a few 3K performances. Then we'll hop out of here. Amina Maatoug and Chloe Foerster each run 4:26 in the mile at Boston. Thoughts on a pair of 4:26s now being the fifth bullet point in our rundown?
Yeah, it's insane, and it's funny because I feel like Amina Maatoug had such a higher profile like a couple of years ago when she was running like 4:31, 4:32, and we were like, oh, could she possibly win a national title in the mile? And now that she's running 4:26, it's like, oh, okay, like yeah, she could be an All-American, right? Despite running an insanely fast time, and I think she's really the story, right? We've seen Foerster run some quick times. We've seen her put together a pretty good season so far, and Maatoug, we just haven't seen her. Obviously, the 3K was very good, but we haven't seen her get back to her top level in her, I think, best event, right? Which is the 1500 meter mile for a while now. And so to see her run 4:26, beat her teammate Foerster, I think is really exciting. And I think, again, shows that she is all the way back after running 4:28, 8:46, and now 4:26. And I just don't know where to put her right in the national picture. She's run incredibly well, but you could say that about so many women in the mile. Now she does have a lot more. She has a lot of experience, right? She's been on the national stage a lot, but not very recently. So I don't know. It's like who do you feel more confident in? in the mile out of the women who have run 4:26 so far. I will go, and I'll just say the names that I think are the top 3 names in the 4:26 group: Amina Maatoug, Riley Chamberlain, or Chloe Foerster.
Chamberlain, I feel way more confident about.
Okay, and I would agree. I think it's Chamberlain, right, number 1 out of that group, and then is it Maatoug Foerster after that, or is it Foerster Maatoug?
I mean, I think you're splitting hairs at this point. Like,
Right.
I think you can make the argument for Foerster or Maatoug. Foerster hasn't really been great so far in postseason settings, but she was
No.
just a sophomore last year, so tomato tomato. And then Amina Maatoug, she'd struggled coming back from injury over the last year, but has clearly very clearly rallied since then. I think I'll take like Maatoug. I think the more important question here is Maatoug an All-American favorite?
And that's kind of what I was trying to get at. I don't think she's like right on the line, right? Because she's 8th on the performance list, and you look at the 7 women in front of her. There's maybe 1, maybe 2 that you think she realistically could beat, and then
more
you look
importantly, that they
behind her,
scratch.
right? Or they scratch, yeah. And then you look behind her, and I think there's some women in there that, I mean, she should beat, but it's like right now, gun to your head, would you pick Maatoug or Kimberly May to be an All-American?
I knew you were going to ask that too. I'd probably pick May.
Me too.
Not happily.
No, I agree. And then Maggie Congdon is another name that I'm really high on. She's been very good over the last year. Do you feel more confident in Maatoug or her? I think that's a eye of the beholder question, because I think it could go either way. But all that to say, I'm thrilled to see Maatoug back at her best, running 4:26. It's awesome. But in this field, it doesn't seem like just getting through the rounds is going to be difficult, right? It's going to be a very competitive prelim, and I think she's shown everything that she can, right, to say that she should be an All-American favorite. But so have a lot of other women, and I think that's where I'm at. Where I think you could say there's probably like 5 names that I'm like, yes, they will be All-Americans, absolutely. And then there's like 10 other names where I'm like, you probably could, but I don't feel any confidence in saying that they will.
Yeah, and that's, man, you're bad. This is the conversation where I think like we knew that the women's mile was incredibly top heavy and incredibly deep and like tricky to figure out and who runs what and who scratches. But this is the conversation just because of Maatoug and Foerster that has made me realize like, oh no, this is going to be very challenging to predict. Like, this is going to be a very significant problem, and I'm realizing I'm like, outside of that top 6 or 7, I don't feel great about anyone else, which is insane because you're talking about women who are 4:26 milers, 4:27 milers, and to say that you don't feel good about them is a really weird statement. I didn't think I'd ever say ever.
So. And the funny thing is, one of those women could win. Like, I don't feel like there's a clear cut. You're 2 or 3 women that I'm like, all right, it's a 70% chance that one of these 2 women win this race. Like, so I don't feel that way.
What's the percentage that? So I think it's fair to say that in the general public would agree that Yildiz is the favorite. I think we would. You don't think so?
Yeah, no, okay. I think so, but it's not she's not a big favorite in my mind, despite the 4:23.
Right. So, what percentage would you give Yildiz, and then what percentage would you give the field to win the national title?
Oh man, I think she has like a 15% chance at winning, and I think the field has like an 85% chance winning.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm there. I'd probably go a little bit higher, like 25 or 30%. I still think go ahead.
No, I just think that this is one of the most level playing field kind of group of women in terms of I know running 4:23 is certainly way faster than running 4:26, but at NCAA's it doesn't that's not the race you're running, right? You're not running a time trial who could just gut it out and hang with a pro field for the longest. You're running a race. And I think all of these women have proven that they're going to be capable of that they're fit enough to run whatever kind of race is run at NCAA's. And then it's just down to who positions themselves the best and who kicks the best.
I don't think that's true, though. I don't think like that just because you run fast means that. I think you're right in the sense that they have the fitness to do it, but I don't know if that like a tactical situation in the mile is going to be conducive to success for a handful of these women who we're talking about here. And I also
Right.
think like let's go down the list. Like, could you see Riggins or Appleton or Chamberlain? Well, maybe Chamberlain winning the mile national title?
Yes. Yeah.
You could see all three of those.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm kind of the opinion that like those are all American locks and those are very strong favorites. But like Ayildez, maybe Hartman, maybe Chamberlain, maybe May. But I don't really know how far beyond that I see a Riggins or Appleton winning the national title. Like there's one thing to be a really really talented miler. There's one thing to be a really really good postseason miler, and to be experienced and to kind of have the entire package of racing skill sets and tactical acumen. I'm just not sure I see them as like national title winners yet. Maybe I'm wrong.
And honestly, that's how I feel about a lot of this field, right? Like because none of this field has been national title winners, and so we're all doing a little bit of projection here. But that's why I say 50% for Ayildez, because I truly think that if you're an All-American lock in our mind, you can win the national title. I just think that's where we're at, and which is what makes this race so exciting to project forward to.
Moving us off of that and going to the men's mile, where we saw a slew of 353 marks. LeBron Kipkemboy runs 353 at Arkansas qualifier. We saw Foerster Malik run 353 in Boston. And then in Montana State boys put in big conversions, getting flat track and altitude conversions. Rob McManus and Harvey Cram both running 353. After scratches, are every single one of those men safe? Malik sits at NCAA number 16, Cram at 15, McManus 14, and Kipkemboy 12. After scratches, are each of those men safe?
I mean, who's going to scratch? I don't know if Malik is safe. I think that is he's on the line, right? He's 16 right now, and I think you could maybe say one, maybe two people scratch. I don't. It's going to be a lower amount of scratches than we've probably seen in the mile in a long, long time. Because of that, I mean, you only need one or two people to run faster than 353.8, which is a ridiculous thing to say, but it could happen. And so I think the top, like Cram, McManus, Kipkemboy, they're good. I think Malik's the only one that has to feel a little nervous about things. At the end of the day, I think he still should make it, but it's going to be tight. And that's because you look at this list, it's such an interesting list of guys.
Yep.
It's like, all right, yeah, some of the guys you expect: Gary Martin, Ethan Strand, Fouad Massaudi, Sahlman. But then it's like, okay, Harrison Witt, stand up. Steven Jackson, welcome to the top of the NCAA. Collins Kiprodich, like Harvey Cram. Like, this is not like a lot of these names were not expected to be in this picture, and they've just forced themselves into it by running something insanely fast.
Yeah. And I think the one solace that a lot of those guys at the tail end of the leaderboard can take is, hey, it's conference weekend, and like coaches have incentives for conference titles to be won in their contracts. And the pool is less so than a regular weekend would be for pursuing a fast mile time. So I think there's a little bit of solace there, but even then, like I mean, someone's going to go. Someone's going to run faster. Someone's going to run faster than Foerster Malik. It's just a matter of how many men run faster than Foerster Malik.
Right.
That's the big question. I'm not sure we're entirely confident about that yet. I'm going to move us off of that. I'm going to stay on the men's side and go up to the 3K though. Colin Sahlman converted 737. Bosley converted 738. Insane. We are now officially at a point in the year where double-digit men have run below 740 for 3K in the same season, including conversions, which is it's such a crazy, crazy thing here. One, after last weekend, what did you think Bosley's chances were of qualifying for the national meet? And then two, what does Colin Sahlman, for the third or second straight weekend that we've been asking this, what does he run? What does he run at the national meet?
Yeah, I mean, going into it with his 741 for Bosley, I don't think you felt super confident. Like, I think he did not have great chances, and he was going to have to run something quicker to be able to qualify. And so, I mean, great performance for him. Awesome to see him back at the top of an NCAA leaderboard. It's been a couple of years, but obviously we know the talent is there. For Sahlman, I have no idea. Like, every weekend he just puts down a performance in an event that I'm not really expecting him to do. Like, and I mean, 737 again. It's a conversation of what is like. What do you think is the best way to get points versus what do you think is the best way for best thing for him long-term development wise, right? And do you think that NAU tries to put together a DMR at conference weekend?
They could.
They've done it before, right?
I think you're right. I think they have done it before. Because if they do that, then you're getting Sahlman in the DMR 3K.
3K,
and that's,
yep.
I mean, that's conducive. I mean, he would be a fresher name in the 3K of all those guys coming back.
Yep.
Man, I guess they could, but who would be the lineup, right? So if it's Sahlman, like who's also in that relay that makes you feel like they can go after it? Is it Ford Washburn?
Ford Washburn in the 12, right?
Like
355 guy. I mean, I feel like that would be solid,
he's
right?
355. Yeah, I mean, he's 355 converted. Although I don't know if he actually improved upon that mark at all. Let's see here.
I don't think so.
No. Yeah. So,
and they would probably. I don't know where's Big Sky this year. It's usually at altitude, right?
Yeah, I think that's why. I think like the chances of them running a conversion are helpful. But like, who's their 800-meter leg, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, that one's tough.
Like that one makes me wonder. Like, man, who would really be the option? I don't really know if it's going to matter. Like, I don't know if with that the limited options that they have, if it would make sense for them to pursue this any further.
It's at NAU. I will say that. And so you get that 7,000 feet conversion.
I don't like that. Don't like that. That could mix things up. Yeah.
It's I mean, this all started with what does Colin Sahlman do, and I think that's kind of where I'm at. If him running another 3K kind of tells me that they're thinking about that. And if they end up doing a DMR, then I think that's what they're going to do, DMR 3K for him. If they don't, I still think. I mean, again, I think if you want to foster his long-term development, I think you put him in the mile, and he just. I think that might be a tougher one for him to score as many points, but I think ultimately that's his event, and I think you put him in his best event and get him that experience.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm like really sold on the long-term development. I think it's like hey, what gives you the best chance to have success, right? And I think it's more of like I think the long-term development, the argument for me is more what gives you the best chance to be an All-American versus the best chance to win a national title. And to me, I'm like, man, I think his best chance to be an All-American is in the mile, but in a weird way, his best chance to win a national title is in the 800.
3K. Oh, in the 800.
3K. You
Oh,
think it's
interesting.
3K? I
It
do.
depends on. I wonder if it just depends on who runs the 3K fresh, right? Like if he's fresh, I think you have a almost a more compelling, just as a compelling argument for the 3K at this point.
Yeah, how
It's
about this?
loaded,
If
but
he runs the 3K, there's no chance that he'll be fresh for it, right?
probably not unless he does the DMR.
Well, I guess to me, I wouldn't
Yeah,
consider that fresh, but um, he'd be fresher in
yeah,
theory.
right, yeah.
In theory, but okay, let's hop off of that. And women's 800 meters start price of Virginia Tech runs 201. Elsewhere, TCU's Tabitha Ngao runs 201. Is Price an All American favorite? And is Ngao where is Ngao in this picture?
No, I mean I think Ngao is she's just getting good at national experience. I think at this point, I think this is an opportunity for her to learn how to get through prelims, all of that. I think for Price, I don't think I don't think she's a favorite at this point. You look at the 8 women ahead of her on the performance list. Now it kind of depends on what Laura Pellicora does, but I mean behind her is Goriarin and Willis. I would be more confident in both of those 2 women. And then you look at like Bosung, Paige, Megan Hunter, Sanu Jala, Julia Whitaker, Haley Kitching, Michaela Rose. Like I think Price is in the conversation of she could qualify for finals, but I think it's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle for her.
I agree. And I hate to say that about a fellow Hokie, but I agree. I think it's going to be more likely than not that she doesn't make the finals. On a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised would you be if I told you that Star Price made the finals?
I would say like a 6. Like I think I'd be surprised. I think it's more likely that she doesn't. But we see women like her all the time make the finals, where it's like depending on the heat setup. Like if you draw a good heat, and if a couple of the favorites have poor days, then all of a sudden someone that you don't expect making the final is in there. And I think her and Chepna Genich, and I mean really those are the 2 names that I have circled as being like I don't expect them to. But if someone breaks into that top group, they're top of my list.
Yeah. Yeah, this is another one that I've realized, oh my gosh, the
Yeah,
All-American qualifying predictions are going to be brutal.
fair.
Brutal. And then we're going to wrap up on the men's side. Yukichi Ishii and Olivier Desmoilis each run 146, both of Penn State. In total now, we have a number of 20 men who have run under 147 for 800 meters this season. Ishii now at NCAA number 8, Desmoilis at NCAA number 12. Do these performances matter in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, Penn State now has 3 guys in the national meet, which is I think awesome, and again has kind of reestablished Penn State as one of the preeminent middle distance programs in the country, which I think is awesome and good for them to get back to that level. It's hard to say anything definitive about this field, though. I think you feel good about Matsatsa and then probably Hassan, and then everyone else, you're like, are you making the finals or are you gonna finish third in the finals? Like, I mean, that's
Yeah,
kind of you could make a compelling argument for you're not in the final, or you could be third for a lot of these men. And so I really have no way of definitively saying one way. Like, yes, this seems like it's a good thing because they're just gonna have bodies at the national meet, and in a year where there doesn't seem a lot of separation from 3 through 16. I think just having more options is going to leave them with a very strong possibility of scoring a decent amount of points.
Penn State has 3 men qualified: Smallwood, Ishii, and Desmueles. Washington has 3 men qualified: O'Toole, Lindhorst, and Reinheimer. Which team has a better outing at the national meet over 800 meters?
I think Washington. I like the consistency that we've seen from Reinheimer. Lindhorst has been here before. I think we've also seen that Coach Powell knows how to set these guys up to work together well, and we've seen it in the mile. I think we're going to see that again in the 800 here this indoor championship.
Could Rivaldo Marshall be at risk of not advancing to the indoor national meet?
Yeah, he's going to have to run something fast at SECs, and I think he will. I think we're going to see some quick times at SECs.
But let's say he doesn't, though. But let's say he doesn't, right? Let's say this all stands.
Then yes, he is at risk.
So will Sahlman? So I guess you're banking on Sahlman scratching if you're him and or McCarthy, right?
Yeah, but even if both of those guys scratch, that puts him at 15, and I do think we're going to see some fast. This is one event you can bank on some fast times happening during conference weekend.
Yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. I think this actually will get faster. I think we'll see a couple more sub 147 marks, and that's absurd. And oh my gosh, Nick Plant is not in a qualifying position.
No, he's gonna have to run something fast.
Oh no. Nick Plant. I just assumed that he was in a qualifying position. And he might not make it. And now in this case, Virginia Tech. Just saying.
Yep. I think he'll run something fast at ACCs. I think.
You think? Yeah. Well, whether he does or not, I hope so. But all right, Ben. I think that is it. We will call it there. Nice job. Nice work from you. If you haven't already, go subscribe on YouTube. Leave a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. Go check out the website. A lot of good stuff coming on the website. And, of course, conference weekend is coming up. And more importantly, NCAA entries and declarations and deadlines are coming up. We will react to those next week. And then the week after that, we will be doing the preview, national meet preview. So, but Ben, for now, that's all I got. Nice job. Thank you for tolerating me on this Tuesday morning. That is all I've got.
All right. Well, until next week, Garrett, I'll talk to you.
Talk to you.